corruption? Well, this is a text that is direct evidence that is stating that it is his father that is going to retaliate. You about corruption from DOJ. Is the whistleblower telling the truth that DOJ said Joe Biden's off limits, no questions about the big guy?
There is an ongoing investigation.
I'm asking you about corruption from DOJ. Were they allowed to investigate Joe Biden, or is the whistleblower telling the truth that DOJ said Joe Biden's off limits, no questions about the big guy? Director Wray, welcome. As you know, I am deeply concerned about the conduct of both the Department of Justice and the FBI, particularly in the last 3 years during the Biden administration. I think the Department of Justice has been profoundly politicized under Attorney General Merrick Garland. And I think the FBI has as well. And unfortunately, I think you've been unwilling to stand up to senior career officials in the FBI who's allowed the FBI to be politicized. I'll tell you, I regularly speak with FBI agents across the country who are unhappy about the integrity of the institution being weakened because DOJ is being treated as a political weapon. I want to talk in particular about the investigation into multiple allegations of corruption concerning Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Because the Department of Justice has, I think from the outset, tried at every step to stop investigation into corruption from Joe Biden. As you're aware, a WhatsApp text message was sent to Henry Zhao, a senior Chinese communist, from Hunter Biden that reads as follows. I'm sitting here with my father, and we would like to understand why the commitment made has not been fulfilled. Tell the director that I would like to resolve this now before it gets out of hand. And now means tonight. And Z, if I get a call or text from anyone involved in this other than you, Zhang, or the chairman, I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows, and my ability to hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction. I am sitting here waiting for the call with my father. Now, Democrats and those in the media trying to defend the White House repeatedly say there is no direct evidence of Joe Biden's involvement in his son's corruption. Well, this is a text that is direct evidence that is stating that it is his father that is going to retaliate. Now, an IRS whistleblower, Gary Shapley, testified before the House of Representatives that the natural step he wanted to follow was to determine whether Joe Biden was in fact sitting next to his father when this threat was made to extort millions of dollars from a Chinese communist. And what the IRS whistleblower testified is that when he tried to find out whether Joe Biden was sitting next to Hunter, that the DOJ blocked getting the GPS data on Joe Biden's phone. Did the FBI try to ascertain where Hunter Biden was and where Joe Biden was when this text was sent?
Well, I think the questions you're asking go to the ongoing investigation being led by Special Counsel Weiss, and so I'm not going to be able to discuss what is or isn't in scope.
So look, there's been testimony under oath from the IRS whistleblower that you did not seek the GPS data. And you're right, David Weiss, the special prosecutor, is in charge of it. And it is David Weiss and his underlings who, according to the IRS whistleblowers, have alleged that they're the ones trying to stop the investigation. They allowed the statute of limitations to run on many of the most serious violations. Not only that, IRS whistleblower Shapley testified that on September 3rd, Assistant U.S. Attorney Leslie Wolf explicitly told investigators that despite having probable cause to search, quote, there is no way a search warrant would be approved when the evidence in question was located inside of Vice President Biden's guest house. Wolf stated that, quote, the optics prevented such a search. Is the FBI, do they make a routine practice of allowing partisan political optics to prevent investigating serious evidence of corruption?
My instructions to our people on this and on every other investigation are that we are to follow the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it, no matter what political influence
Then why
there
did
may
you
be
get
out
the
there.
GPS data on where Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were?
Again, Senator, with respect, I can't
But
discuss
it's
an
not
ongoing
with respect.
investigation.
And Director Wray, you and I have gone round and round on this because I understand. Anytime you're asked about this, the answer is it's an ongoing investigation. Of course, the investigation isn't ongoing. You're not doing the work. You got whistleblowers pointing out that you're not doing the work, and you are hiding behind the skirts of the Attorney General. Look, the whistleblower also testified that the Attorney General, when he came before Congress, go to the next chart, came before Congress, lied under oath to this committee. The Attorney General testified to this committee in response to my questioning. I have pledged not to interfere with the Hunter Biden investigation, and I have carried through on that pledge. The IRS whistleblowers have alleged the Attorney General lied under oath, a felony. Was the Attorney General telling the truth when he said this? Do we have the chart? We don't have the chart. Was the Attorney General telling the truth when he said, I have pledged not to interfere with the Hunter Biden investigation, and I have carried through on my pledge?
Again, I can't speak to the Attorney General's testimony. I can only tell you what my instructions have been to our people, and I
Has
expect
there
those
been
to be
political
followed.
interference in the investigation into Hunter Biden and Joe Biden?
Not that I have experienced.
Were the investigators allowed to investigate whether Joe Biden was complicit in the corruption?
Again, there is an ongoing investigation.
I'm asking you about
being led.
corruption from DOJ. Were they allowed to investigate Joe Biden, or is the whistleblower telling the truth that DOJ said Joe Biden's off limits, no questions about the big guy?
And as to what is in scope or not in scope of the ongoing investigation, I would refer you to Special Counsel Weiss. That is not me hiding behind anything, Senator. That is a longstanding policy that has been in place
Director
through
Wray,
multiple administrations,
you have a
going back years and years
have
and
a
years.
responsibility to the FBI, not to allow it to be a partisan tool and a partisan weapon. The testimony, and by the way, the FBI has done nothing.
And I have not, and I will not.
Have you opened an investigation into whether the Attorney General lied under oath to Congress and whether the Attorney General obstructed justice?
I'm not going to go down that road here.
I know you're not. That's the point. Nobody thinks you've opened an investigation because you're not willing to. And the amazing thing is, Director Wray, I've known you 30 years. You're not a partisan Democrat. You're simply sitting blithely by while career partisans in your agency allow it to be weaponized. And you are damaging the FBI, and you are damaging the Department of Justice. Let me ask you also, the whistleblower testified that investigators wanted to execute a search warrant on a storage unit used by Hunter Biden, and instead they tipped off Hunter Biden's lawyer before the search warrant was carried out. Is it typical FBI practice to tip off the subject of a search warrant before the search warrant so they can remove any evidence that's incriminating?
What is typical is that when you're dealing with an individual who has a protective detail, it is typical for agents to be in contact with the subject's protective detail.
Does the protective detail guard the storage unit?
Again, I can't speak to the storage unit specifically. What I can tell you is that when it comes to...
Why would the FBI tip off the subject of a search warrant about the storage unit that was going to be searched beforehand? Does that not undermine the very essence of an investigation that DOJ is purporting to undertake?
Again, I'm not going to be able to discuss specific investigative steps
But
that
who
we're
is?
taking.
If you're not, nobody answers these questions, and it's why people are furious with the cover-up, because you don't believe the FBI is accountable to Congress or to the American people.
Your time is up. Director Wray has requested a 5-minute recess. 5 minutes.
Let me just, Senator, if I might just quickly respond and then go to the break. Thank you. I understand why this is frustrating. I do. But it is also the case that these policies that I am referring to about my inability to discuss ongoing investigations, and certainly internal deliberations related to ongoing investigations, are policies that have not only been in place for many, many years through multiple administrations of both parties, but in fact, these were policies that were actually strengthened under the last administration, and that my predecessor was faulted in a fairly scathing Inspector General report for not following. And so I keep that in my mind.
You have an obligation to call it out.
Engaged in this job. Thank you.
You have an obligation to call out corruption.
Mr. Director, it seems to me that some people should not have power. I don't care how smart they are. I don't care how experienced they are. They just don't have enough maturity or morality or ethics to exercise power. And I am talking, of course, about your predecessor. You have been a significant improvement. Unlike my experience with you, and what I've observed is that unlike your predecessor, you're not egomaniacal, and you're not egocentric, and you're not a self-aggrandizer. You don't run around like your predecessor going, look at me, look at me. You don't leak to the press like the Titanic. And I know that's a low bar, but I appreciate it. You talk a lot about 38,000 women and men in the FBI, the vast majority of whom do an extraordinary job, and I agree with that. Most of those women and men that you're talking about are in your field offices. I'm not saying there aren't some in the Washington office. But the problems we've had with the FBI over the past decade, you've alluded to them, have come primarily out of the Washington office. I listened carefully to your recitation of your efforts to clean that up. But I think most fair-minded Americans still wonder if there has been real accountability in all cases. And that's the spirit in which I'm going to ask you these questions. Who made the decision at the FBI to raid Mar-a-Lago for those documents?
Well, I'm not sure there's a specific person that made the decision. It was the investigative team that was on that investigation, working with the prosecutors on the case.
Why didn't you just do a consent to search and avoid all the drama?
Well,
You, but whoever made the decision.
yeah. Well, let me try it this way, because obviously we are talking now about not just an ongoing investigation that's being led by a special counsel, but an ongoing investigation being led by a special counsel that's in front of a court with likely very strong views about what it is I can say publicly, which gets at some of your gracious comments about public commentary about cases. But I think in that particular instance, if you look at the affidavit in support of the search warrant, and more importantly, the pleadings that were filed by the prosecutors in the case, they lay out in a very detailed way all the efforts that were made to ensure compliance short of proceeding to a search, as well as now has been charged, actual obstruction of justice. And so in my experience, again, speaking more generally now, both as a line prosecutor and now as FBI director, when it comes to obtaining classified information, retrieving it, we typically pursue the least intrusive means possible. But if those don't work, and certainly if there's obstruction of justice, which in this case as found by a probable cause standard by the judge, then it's pretty typical to resort to a search warrant.
Of course, as you know as well as I do, that the FBI cannot censor American speech. It talks about abridging speech, that our First Amendment does. At one time, I think it was during your tenure, the FBI had 80 FBI agents working with social media, encouraging social media to take down accounts and remove, quote, disinformation and election interference. a district court found that the FBI and other agencies asked social media platforms to remove content and to change their moderation policies in a way that violated the First Amendment. And it went up to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit limited the injunction, but here's what the Fifth Circuit said. The FBI, quote, likely coerced the platforms into moderating content and encouraged them to do so by effecting changes in their moderation policies, end quote, in violation of the First Amendment. The FBI agreed with the plaintiffs that, quote, I'm quoting the Fifth Circuit, federal agents ran afoul of the First Amendment by coercing and significantly encouraging social media platforms to censor disfavored speech, including by threats of adverse government action, like antitrust enforcement and legal reforms. That's serious. Is the Fifth Circuit wrong?
Well, as you may know, first off, let me just say the opinions talk about a whole bunch of other executive agencies besides the FBI, and I'm not going to speak to what the other agencies did or didn't do. But
well, you weren't the only one. It was the White House. It was Homeland Security. But your folks were there too. All 80 of them, 80 agents.
Well, but
combing social media every day, calling Twitter, calling Facebook. Take that down. Get rid of that account. And it wasn't just on election interference. It was on COVID vaccines. It was on lockdowns.
So a couple things, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify this. So first, on things like COVID vaccines and stuff like that, the FBI had no role in telling anybody to take anything down. In fact, as you may know, the FBI was the only agency back at that time, and the only agency in the entire intelligence community to reach the conclusion to moderate confidence that the origins of the pandemic were most likely a lab leak in China. We were the only agency, so we most certainly were not encouraging anybody to communicate differently on that. Second, even on the topics we did communicate with social media companies about, from everything I've seen, we in fact did not instruct anybody to take that information down. As to the Fifth Circuit's opinion, as you may also know, we actually hotly contest a lot of the findings, and not just the legal conclusions, but the actual factual findings, and the department has sought Supreme Court review, asked them to vacate the injunction. The Supreme Court's not only vacated the injunction, but granted cert, so I probably should leave it at that.
Let me stop you a second. I've gone way over. I want to ask you one last question. We had a controversy during the election about Mr. Hunter Biden's laptop. And at that time, you had 80 agents interfacing with social media, doing whatever they were doing. The FBI had the Hunter Biden laptop, got it on December 9th, 2019. The New York Post story, which a lot of the social media companies at the suggestion of government took down, the story came out on 10/14/2020. Why didn't the FBI just say, hey, the laptop's real? Why didn't you just tell everybody the laptop's real? We're not vouching for what's on it, but it's real. This isn't a fiction.
Well, as you might imagine, the FBI cannot, especially in a time like that, be talking about an ongoing investigation. Second, I would tell you that at least my understanding is that both the FBI folks involved in the conversations and the Twitter folks involved in the conversations both say that the FBI did not direct Twitter to suppress.
But others were in government.
Well, I can't speak to others in government. That's part of the point that I was trying to make, because the Fifth Circuit's opinion.
But you're the FBI. You're not part of the White House and part of Homeland Security. You're not supposed to be political. You see all this controversy going on. Why didn't the FBI say, Time out, folks. We're not getting in the middle of this, but the laptop's real.
Again, we have to be very careful about what we can say, especially in the middle of an election season, because that's precisely some of the problems that led to my predecessor's negative findings from the Inspector General.
Did you hear a gavel?
Thank you,
I
Senator
heard a
Kennedy.
gavel.